Welcoming you into the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad doing today's. We've got an awesome show planned out for you over the next few hours. Again, appreciate everyone joining in here on the Rip City Drive. We've got lots of things on tap today, including a couple pairs of or a couple packs of Hops tickets to give away as well. So make sure to stay tuned for that. As I mentioned before, we got a jam-packed show today. We're going to be catching up with Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy, NFL writer Dan Pizzuta. Again, NFL cut day was today. The rosters got trimmed down. Some interesting guys, obviously, getting cut. Some guys making the cut. So I'm curious to get Dan's thoughts on that. And then 5 o'clock hour, very excited to have Sean Hyken in studio for the whole hour. We'll be catching up on everything with Sean. Obviously, the Blazers season is coming up here in just a couple months. And, we're kind of just getting ready for the start of the season. Want to get his thoughts on the Blazers and the new ownership group and kind of what he's hearing behind the scenes so far. Obviously, that's going to be a process and nothing that probably happens very quickly, but nevertheless, excited to get Sean's thoughts here in a couple hours as well. Thanks again for everyone tuning in. It's another kind of like yesterday, another pretty warm but yet cloudy-ish, humid day outside. So go figure as far as our weather here as we wrap up the end of August, but not going to complain that it's still somewhat sunny and warm outside. Just need this haze and these clouds to go away. Give me some blue skies. All right. So, again, settling in for today's show, make sure to check us out on YouTube, Rip City Radio 620, or give us a call, 503-248-0620. Again, 503-248-0620 if you want to jump on, join the conversation. Can also jump on our YouTube page and jump into the chat there as well. Lots to get into here on the big show. We're going to give our first pack of Hops tickets away here in just a moment. But before we do, definitely need to take a moment and recognize recognize our Thank a Teacher promotion. Today's teacher of the day is John Lyon, who teaches at David Douglas Arthur Academy in Portland, and we are told he is an amazing PE teacher. The students love him. He's always finding ways to keep them happy and interested, and this school has no gym. The students and teachers are out in the weather all year during PE class. He goes out of his way all year, even when school's not in session, to help out. On his days off, he gets the garbage and recycle out for pickup. If an alarm goes off at the school during the night, he's always there to help as needed. He deserves this award. Congrats, John Lyon. You're in the running to win $5,000 for your classroom. Thank a Teacher promotion here at Rip City Radio 620 and iHeartRadio. Coming up here in the big show, again, we'll kind of preview what we got coming up. We caught up with Malik Murphy, Oregon State quarterback, coming up here at 3:20. We'll be previewing that conversation. It was great to catch up with the Beaver Signal caller ahead of Saturday night's matchup against the Cal Bears at Reser Stadium. As I mentioned yesterday, and those who have listened to me, we'll dive into it. But Malik Murphy is one of those guys who I think is going to be a true X factor for Oregon State. You talk to him, you watch him play, you see how he carries himself. He is truly one of those, dynamic presences under center, as we talked about with Trent Bray yesterday. So definitely very excited to be able to catch up with Malik Murphy here in a little bit and get his thoughts on a variety of different things. And we'll kind of preview and set the stage for how ultimately Malik Murphy made his way to Corvallis, which Oregon State's going to be very, very happy about. But that's the plan for 3:20. A little bit later, like I said, we'll catch up with Dan Pizzuta. It's cut day in the NFL. There's a few players that made the cut, a few players that didn't, as far as like my Oregon State radar that I want to get his thoughts on. Then we're going to dive into everything. I want to see what he thinks of the Seahawks this year. Obviously, year two of the coaching staff they got up there, and I want to see how he thinks the Sam Darnold, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, Cooper Kupp connection's going to look like up there. And I'm very excited to just kind of dive into a bunch of different NFL thoughts. Does he think we could see a rematch? Could we see the Chiefs and Eagles back in the Super Bowl again? Will it be somebody else? It's been a minute since we caught up with Dan, so very excited for that conversation. And then, as I mentioned, later in the program, we'll catch up with Sean Hyken. Lots to get into there with Sean. But yes, let's go ahead and get into our first Hops ticket giveaway. We have Hops tickets for you, a 4-pack of tickets. So again, if you want a 4-pack of tickets to the Hillsboro Hops coming up tomorrow, give us a call now, 503-248-0620. Again, 503-248-0620. This first 4-pack is to see the Hops take on Vancouver, again, tomorrow August 27th at Hillsborough Ballpark. Again, 503-248-0620. Give us a call if you want to have a 4-pack of tickets to see the Hillsborough Hops in action. The final home series for the Hops coming up this week. Obviously, it's always a great time, and you get a chance to be some of the last people that are at the old Hillsborough Ballpark before, obviously, the Hops switch over to their new stadium, which I got a chance to drive by the new stadium on my way to Topgolf with my friends and family just a little bit ago, and it looks really nice. Like, I hadn't been over in the Hillsborough area for a minute, but it looked really, really nice. I think what the Hops have going is going to be pretty cool next year, and you hear about all the things that the amenities are going to have, and then you've obviously heard some things about other events they'll be able to host there too with their capacity. So definitely very cool and exciting. So if you missed your chance to get the Hops tickets here right now, don't worry. We've got another 4-pack to give away in the 4 o'clock hour, up at the top of the 4 o'clock hour. So stay tuned for that. And again, Hillsborough Hops obviously are in action this week as they take on the Vancouver Canadians at Hillsborough Ballpark, the final week of ball games at Hillsborough Ballpark. We got one more 4-pack of tickets coming up at the 4 o'clock hour. All right, so just kind of wrapping up. We played it a little bit in the open, but obviously as we kind of get ready for, the start of college football season, the biggest thing going on right now is obviously professional baseball as it kind of rounds out August until college football starts. And I talked at length yesterday about Cal Raleigh and what he had been able to achieve, crushing the record and with his 48th and 49th home run. Then he hits number 50 last night. And again, we're going to talk a lot of Cal Raleigh a little bit later in the week when we catch up with TJ Mathewson from the Marine Layer podcast up in Seattle. One of my good buddies, TJ. I'm excited to talk Mariners with him on Thursday. So again, stay tuned for that conversation. But very excited to talk to him about Cal and just how, in some way, like it just continues to amaze the things that Cal Raleigh has been able to do swinging the bat this year. And obviously, recently the Mariners haven't been quite as good as they were there for a while, but they're still right in the mix for one of those wild card bursts. And, we'll see how it all shakes out. But I think they've got a deep team and have a team that can make a run. So let's go ahead and hear last night again, that 50th home run from Cal Raleigh.
The 3-2 on the way to Cal. Swinging a well-hit ball deep to left field. Head into the upper deck. Stay fair. Upper deck. Goodbye baseball. Number 50 for Cal Raleigh. He becomes one of only 33 members of the 50 home run club. And he reaches the upper deck like he did with home run number 48 yesterday. 49 he crushed off the out-of-town scoreboard. And the magical season just continues for Cal Raleigh. Holy smokes, what a shot.
Again, as it sounded last night with the Mariners and Cal Raleigh hitting his 50th home run. And again, you just have to be beyond impressed with what he's been able to do this season in a Mariners uniform. And obviously, last night, the Mariners get the 9-6 win over the Padres. And just looking at the MLB standings here, let's take a quick peek. Again, Mariners are still very much in contention for the AL West. Again, just a game and a half behind the Houston Astros for the AL West, but then you go over to the wild card standings, and the Mariners are just right there as well. They are just half a game behind the New York Yankees for that second wild card spot, as the Boston Red Sox and Yankees currently hold those two spots. So obviously work to be done for the Mariners, to still secure their spot in the postseason. But nevertheless, I'm as we've heard and as I've grown up with, the Mariners have a tendency to, have things maybe slip this time of the year a little bit at times, or we've seen that movie before. But I really think this year with what Cal Raleigh's been able to do, the depth of that team and all that, I think they can make a big charge at the postseason if they, either win the division or make a wild card spot. And, TJ's as connected as anybody when it comes to Mariners stuff. And I'm going to ask him point blank on Thursday, can this team make a legit run at the World Series? So, see, folks, there's my by habit, as I'm ready to say World Series, the word college almost comes in front of it because I'm so much more used to discussing the College World Series and college baseball as opposed to the real World Series and the World Championship of Baseball. But nevertheless, we'll see how things ultimately shake out for the Mariners down the stretch. They've won 2 in a row now, but they're 4-6 in their last 10. compared to the Red Sox and Yankees, which have been 6-4 and 7-3 in their last 10, respectively. So it's going to be, a bit of a battle. The Mariners do have a 4-game cushion on the Kansas City Royals for, that next spot. So it'll be interesting to kind of see, if they can kind of fend off any teams coming up from above as well. So we'll be keeping tabs on that, obviously, this week as well. But nevertheless, it was very impressive to continue to see what Cal Raleigh has been able to do. So we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be, again, previewing our conversation with Malik Murphy, catching up with Malik and kind of setting the stage for Malik Murphy's journey to Oregon State. As many know, he started his career at Texas after being, a highly recruited quarterback out of Southern California, and goes to Texas. Obviously, is behind Quinn Ewers and, Arch Manning to an extent. He ultimately plays a little for Texas, but leaves and then finds his way to Duke last year. He's an everyday starter. He leads Duke to a 9-3 overall record. Pretty good numbers throwing the ball. And then obviously Duke decides to go in a different direction at quarterback, and Malik Murphy is out in the portal again. And dare I say, it was a perfect marriage at a perfect time for him and Oregon State, and the rest is history, as they like to say. So we're going to kind of dive into that whole process, how Malik Murphy found his way back to Oregon State, or I should say back because he visited the year before, but yes, found his way to Oregon State, and ultimately how he's there now getting ready for Oregon State in the 2025 football season. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy here on the Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. I hope everyone's having a good Tuesday so far, getting ready for week one of college football kicking off this weekend. I know I'm definitely excited. Hope everyone is as well. We're going to continue to get you ready for everything college football this week here on the Rip City Drive, in addition to a whole bunch of other fun stuff too. So why would you be anywhere else on your radio dial rather than 620 a.m. or on the iHeartRadio app? Again, just search Rip City Radio 620. You got it. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get you ready here. We're going to be catching up with Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy in just a couple minutes. But before we do, let's just kind of set the stage for those of you who maybe are unfamiliar with Malik's journey to Oregon State and what the process has been. So just kind of going back in the Wayback Machine a little bit here. So back back a couple years ago, Malik Murphy was a quarterback in the class of 2021, a four-star coming out of Gardena, California, Juniper Sierra High School. 6'5", 235 pounds, was a pretty consensus four-star recruit across the board. Again, looking at Rivals ranking, specifically a four-star quarterback. And, there were a lot of schools that wanted him, right? And this is where the origins of the story begin. So Malik Murphy, in almost a very similar sense to another Oregon State quarterback we saw a few years ago in DJU, coming out of high school, there wasn't, obviously, I think we'll kind of look at it here and take a look at his full offer sheet coming out of high school. But back as a recruit, Malik Murphy, had pretty much offers from anybody and everybody, right? He was one of the top players in the rankings, had a strong high school career, was per Rivals, the 12th overall best quarterback, 15th best player coming out of California, and again, signed with Texas. Obviously, went and played for Steve Sarkisian in that group, and first year on, he he early enrolled in January 2022. He redshirted that first season at Texas after he had an ankle injury, coming back from his time in high school and was just getting healthy. In the 2023 spring game for Texas, he made his debut for the Longhorns, so to speak, went 9-13 for 165 yards, and then he started to hear what we would see these next couple years. After Texas's spring game, he received transfer offers to go to other programs, but decided to stay at Texas for that 2023 season, and ultimately ended up playing in a few games that year for the Longhorns, and had a couple standout games, most notably against BYU, a 35-6 win where he went 16-25 for 2 touchdowns, and then against Kansas State, a 33-30 overtime win where he went 19-37 for 248, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions for Malik Murphy in that game against Kansas State. After the season, and it was clear that, Quinn Ewers was obviously going to be back this last season. Arch Manning was going to be, Arch Manning at this point. Malik Murphy, from what I was able to, comprehend, kind of saw the writing on the wall. It could be tougher to play at Texas with the spot that he was in, and it was after December of 2023 when he entered the transfer portal the first time. And here's where things get interesting. So Malik Murphy, coming out of Southern California, naturally was familiar with current Oregon State offensive coordinator Ryan Gunderson. When Ryan Gunderson was at UCLA, he kind of overlapped, and Malik Murphy had even joked with us not too long ago that he kind of knew he wasn't going to stay in the state of California for college. He wanted a new experience, but remembered Gundy recruiting him when he was Chip Kelly's quarterbacks coach there with the Bruins. And that relationship, that little moment turned out to be something worthwhile, because a year ago, again, as I mentioned, December of 2023, Murphy enters the transfer portal. And we here at Oregon State were, surprised when we started to hear that Oregon State was pursuing him last cycle. And so much so that Malik Murphy actually showed up. There was the very famous photo of him being at the Portland airport and making his way down to Corvallis. It was an evening visit, and ultimately it kind of ended up being rather quick. And then Murphy went on and visited Duke and ultimately became Duke's starting quarterback last year. However, it's kind of like anything else in this world now today. You never want to burn a relationship, burn a bridge, because, it's that old saying, like, you never know when you might see people again, especially with the transfer portal. And while I'm sure Trent Bray, Ryan Gunderson, the staff last year were a little disappointed they weren't able to get Malik Murphy last year, they maintained a solid relationship, kept that door open, and then this last year, when after Malik Murphy took Duke to a 9-3 record, he threw for 2,933 yards and 26 touchdown passes against 12 interceptions, a Duke record for 26 touchdown passes. And if you can believe it, from what we've heard, Duke was wanting to move in a new direction. So, per what we've heard from sources and other things, Duke was really wanting to have a more mobile quarterback under center than what Malik Murphy was. And that's not to say that Malik Murphy isn't a dual threat guy. He definitely can move. But compared to, say, DJU for Oregon State a few years ago, there's not as much willingness to want to run the ball. You know, DJU was like, hey, I'll take off on that quarterback draw and, be willing to bounce off a few guys in the secondary. Malik Murphy, more of a, true pocket passer, somebody who wants to, go through his progressions, make the reads, and find his receivers downfield and can move if necessary. He's certainly not a statue, but Duke wanted to go in a different direction. They went and grabbed a quarterback from Tulane, and per what we've seen from On3, gave him a pretty good package to come to Tulane or come from Tulane to Duke. And at that point, Malik Murphy found himself in need of a home, and he even talked about that in a story we wrote at Beaver's Edge back in the spring when he was like, well, it wasn't really my choice to leave, but he still wants to be a starting quarterback. And then on December 9th, Malik Murphy entered the transfer portal. And after Oregon State's struggles with Giovanni McCoy, Ben Gulbranson, and Jabari Johnson at quarterback last year, mostly Gulbranson and McCoy, and I should say even mostly McCoy as he was the starter for the majority of the year, the Beavers knew they needed an overhaul. They knew they needed to retool the quarterback position, find somebody who was going to be able to be a dynamic presence under center and somebody who could, inspire that, not even so much, but just be a dominant presence in the locker room, someone that guys look up to, someone who can make all the throws on the field. That's something you heard Trent Bray yesterday. For lack of better terms, Oregon State didn't have a quarterback last year who could, make all the throws on the field, at least consistently. So Beavers knew they needed an overhaul. And I think once Malik Murphy entered the portal, there was some hubbub. We're like, okay, he visited Oregon State last year, and there's definitely a good chance the Beavers could factor into the mix again. However, we had heard that Kentucky and Auburn were also, highly intrigued with Murphy's, skill set and what he could bring to the table. Ultimately, it is Oregon State that won out because Malik Murphy comes on a visit. This time, he says, because it was not during the night, it was daylight, he was able to meet with so many more coaches, players, teammates, see the facilities. It just felt like more of a real, true visit. And, as best I can, recall from how the interaction went down, Malik was, pretty much walking down the stairs at Valley Football Center after meeting. It's like, let's do this. And that was pretty much the extent of Malik committing. And obviously, Oregon State's hoping it's a huge swoon for them moving forward. But, you're talking about a guy who has been in big-time programs. Like, he spent 2 years with Steve Sarkisian in that Texas Longhorn group. And you think about, Quinn Ewers, you think about Steve Sarkisian, you think about Arch Manning, and then you look at Duke last year, like after not even getting a chance to be a full-time starter at Texas, going and immediately being thrown into a full-time starter role at Duke last year, and they go 9-3, right? He completes 60% of his passes, almost 3,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, 12 picks. Again, the rushing yards, he finished with negative rushing yards. That's not ideal, but, I think more than anything, Oregon State, unlike last year, doesn't have like an unproven commodity at this level. Like you go back, I think there were some optimism with Giovanni McCoy, right? He had won the FCS Player of the Year award a couple of years back, but there was also the question of how he would adjust to the, D1 and ultimately, Pac-12 level of competition. And at times he struggled, right? And then Ben Gulbranson, we obviously saw him a few years ago when he, led Oregon State to a 7-1 record down the stretch, Las Vegas Bowl MVP, all those things. But you look at the roster, the team he had around him, and there were times when it necessarily wasn't Gulbranson's arm or his quarterbacking, kind of abilities that were necessarily leading Oregon State to success. And I say case in point with the matchup against Oregon that year, where Oregon State had a miraculous comeback against the Ducks there at Reser Stadium. What was it? 13, 14 straight runs. I don't think that was purely just like we were going to run. I think from Oregon State's perspective, it was, yeah, we feel a lot better running the ball than throwing the ball. And I think, Ben was admirable, and I have a ton of respect for the kid. And like Kerry Hagers told us a couple years ago, I guarantee he is going to be one of your, future children's pediatricians out there. Dr. Gulbranson is a real thing, and it's going to be coming to a city near you someday. But, I think, as far as, what he could provide as far as elevating an offense with his quarterback play, I think it just wasn't a very high ceiling. And I think we're kind of seeing that with Stanford. We'll see how the year plays out. Still pulling for him, of course, but I think there's times when you have to kind of look at things and call a spade, so to speak. So settling back in, again, we'll be catching up with Malik Murphy here just momentarily. But again, Malik comes in spring. I think right away he the only thing about Malik in spring that maybe just raised my eyebrow a little bit beyond all the physical tools was like, he's big, right? I would encourage anyone to go to the Beaver's Edge YouTube channel and check out our interview we had with him back in early August, because you see me and my colleague at Beaver's Edge, Ryan Harlan, and we're both like, 5'8", 5'9" on a good day, maybe a little taller with some tall standing shoes. And then you look at like both of us, like just vertically looking up at Malik Murphy when we're having this conversation, because, he truly is all of 6'5", 230 pounds. Like, he is a big dude, just a dynamic presence. And, he's muscular, got, big arms, big calves, all those things you want to see, from a quarterback. And you can tell he's a guy who definitely hits the weight room. But all that to say, in spring, it was clear he could make all the throws. It was clear, he had started to develop some chemistry with the receivers. But the only thing in spring that was not ideal with Malik was, you're like, okay, there may be a few interceptions here. And he had a few throughout spring. And you kind of look back at, the last year at Duke, he was 26-12. Ideally, you probably would like that ratio to be closer to single-digit interceptions. You love the 26 touchdowns, of course. But, that's probably something Malik Murphy's going to be working on kind of going into this year. And I'll tell you what, folks, the improvement that he made from spring to fall camp was night and day. And I'm not saying that Oregon State's secondary is, not talented, because I think it's maybe the most talented position group on defense. But Malik Murphy was able to tighten up the interceptions. He was a guy that didn't even throw his first interception until, the fifth or sixth day of fall camp. And, I was particularly impressed with just how he was able to develop chemistry with receivers, grow more comfortable in the offense. There wasn't a big learning curve for him in the offense. And I think that speaks to Ryan Gunderson's kind of simplicity of the offense he runs, that Malik was able to pick it up and kind of hit the ground running with it. So overall, I think Oregon State found themselves a gem. We'll see, nothing in college football is guaranteed year to year anymore. He's got 2 seasons of eligibility. Our conversations we've had with him so far is like, I've already transferred twice. I don't really want to do that again. So I think, in my opinion, there's 2 possibilities. Oregon State will have, or I guess supposedly there's 3. Oregon State will have a quarterback for 2 years in Malik Murphy, depending on how this season goes. And next, if, he, doesn't just light the world on fire as far as numbers, he blows up so much that he considers going to the next level, which I think Oregon State fans would be absolutely thrilled about regardless. Or C, maybe things don't quite work out as expected, but I think the odds of that are probably less than 5%. Everything we've seen, you go back to last year, Oregon State with pretty mediocre quarterback play was able to win 5 games. I think with Malik Murphy, as long as he stays healthy, which, again, that's everything in college football, right? Health. And if he stays healthy, I think he's going to really have the potential to have a big year for Oregon State. And as we wrap up that point, let's go ahead and queue up our interview with Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter with you. We're pleased to be joined now by Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy. Malik, appreciate the time. How are things down in Corvallis, my friend?
Going great. Thanks for calling.
Absolutely. And again, we'll be quick with your time today, but appreciate the time. Just how excited are you to get started with this 2025 season against Cal on Saturday night?
Very excited. Can't wait. The guys are super, super ready for it.
And for you personally, coming over to Corvallis, what appealed to you about Oregon State and obviously offensive coordinator Ryan Gunderson and the offense after spending last year at Duke?
A huge home feeling. I was very familiar with the staff and the environment, so it felt like the right place at the right time.
Talk a little bit about just the process of you having transferred a couple times and obviously moving on from Duke last year and landing at Corvallis. You know, you had your first chance to be in a full-time starter last year and obviously now looking to build off that.
Definitely. It's been a journey, like you said, transferring a couple of times, but I'm thankful for the journey that I've been on. A lot of people don't get a second opportunity to play again. Entering the transfer portal is not always an easy thing to do. A lot of people get stuck in the portal and is not able to find another home. So I'm grateful for Oregon State and the staff for bringing me in and giving me the opportunity to play here.
Between Austin, Durham, and Corvallis, very, very different cities, different climates, all that. What have you enjoyed the most about Corvallis so far, Malik?
Just home feeling, honestly, being able to be to myself, not really have to worry about too much, not many distractions, and I get time to just kind of chill, vibe with my teammates, and go eat food.
I've heard a couple times you still Taco Vino still your go-to spot in Corvallis.
Oh yeah, that's a spot for sure.
Catching up with Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy. Malik, just a couple more questions for you. Appreciate your time here on this Tuesday. I look around, I see the skill position players you have around you at wide receiver and running back and a growing offensive line. How much do you kind of feel that you can elevate this offense just with your play this year?
I think as long as I do my job, the playmakers around me, it make everything easier. I just got to get them the ball, and they'll do what they know how to do, and that's make plays with it. So as long as I do my job and I'm able to be accurate and make the right decisions, I think we'll be in a good spot.
I wanted to also congratulate you on being a team captain, Malik, but I think that also speaks hand in hand with your leadership. It's something that caught my eye ever since I spoke to you back in spring. Just where does that kind of come from, your leadership kind of gene, so to speak?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I think it's one of those things where I'm just being myself, and if that's a leader in the eyes of another, then so be it. I just want to be myself and not be anyone else or try to be anyone else. I want the guys to know I'm authentic and I'm who I say I am. So with that being said, I'm just come here, do the same thing over and over, being the same guy the best I can.
Absolutely. Catching up with Malik Murphy. Just a couple more for you here, Malik. Another thing that stood out to me ever since we first spoke back in spring was your desire to win, and you're somebody who wants to win, wants to see your team succeed. Just talk a little bit about your desire to win.
I'm a competitor. I think it all translates when you have people around you with the same mindset as well. When you put a lot of competitive minds together and a lot of people that want the same things as you, you're able to push forward and do a lot of good things. So, wanting to win is one thing, and doing what it takes to win is another. You got to put in the work. You got to do all the necessary things and even more to get to where you want to go.
For sure. Just last thing I got for you here, Malik. Let's just talk a little Cal. Cal obviously always going to come in with a strong defense. What are kind of the challenges of facing the Bears this weekend to kind of open up the season?
Oh yeah, they're a good football team for sure. We're going to give them their respect, and we're going to go out there and play how we know how to play, prepare how we know how to prepare, and we do. So I'm excited for this weekend.
And just kind of last go along with that, a night game, Reser Stadium, nationally televised. Would you have it any other way?
No, sir, I would not.
Appreciate the time, Malik. Thank you so much, and look forward to talking to you post-game Saturday, and best of luck against the Bears.
I appreciate it. Go Bears.
Thanks, Malik. Malik Murphy, Oregon State quarterback here on the Rip City Drive. That was Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy. Was exciting to catch up with Malik, and we'll continue a little bit more with that conversation and analyze it a little bit more a little bit later in the show. But we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll kind of dive into a few different things. Maybe we'll even touch base on the news of the day, which is the Taylor Swift Travis Kelce engagement. So maybe dive into that a little bit. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Tuesday afternoon. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great Tuesday so far. We'll be getting into a lot of different things in the 4 o'clock hour, including we'll take a deep dive into the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelsey news at the top of the 4 o'clock hour and give away our next 4 pack, I should say, of Hops tickets. So if you were looking for 4 pack of Hops tickets, we still got one more to give away. We'll do that again, 4 o'clock. That is for the 31st, which is Sunday's game. You can truly be the last person, or one of the last people, I should say, to check out the old Hillsborough Ballpark before they move on to their, as the big voice would say, palatial new estate next season. So let's go ahead and touch base on something that definitely caught my eye as I was getting ready prepping for the show today, and that is Colorado football is having their live mascot, Ralphie the Six. He is retiring after this season, which is definitely interesting. Again, will be retiring. They're not getting rid of Ralphie, obviously, as Ralphie is, a long-standing tradition of the Buffalo running out with the players down onto Folsom Field. So that's not going anywhere, but you learn there have been many different Ralphies along the way, and there's a point where, Ralphie retires, and they bring in and start training the new Ralphie. So interestingly enough, the live mascot, Ralphie the Sixth, will be retiring after 4 years of service in the role, the university announced today. The school made the move due to what it described as an indifference to running, typical of many mammals, both four-legged and two-legged. Because of that, the university will be transitioning the buffalo, which is nicknamed Ember, to a companion buffalo role on a ranch where she will live with her predecessor, Ralphie the Fifth, which is kind of interesting. There, Ember the Fifth will be able to focus on I like this. We'll be able to focus on relaxing strolls on the pasture, which is her favorite hobby. They go on to say Ember has been excellent in many aspects as her role of Ralphie. Get that as well, her role of Ralphie. But she's happiest relaxing on the ranch, and we want to be respectful of her wishes. Taylor Stratton, the director of Ralphie Live Mascot Program, said in a statement, "She will continue to get the same level of love and care that all of our Ralphies receive, and will enjoy socializing with Ralphie the Fifth." So it's kind of interesting that, like, at least I would need to Google and see what the average lifespan is of a buffalo, but it's kind of cool that they get to ultimately retire to, quote, the ranch with their predecessor, at a certain point. The good news is, they're like anything else. Brian Cox would be proud. There's a succession plan in place, and it's been in place for a number of months. Per this story, it says not a lot of information on Ralphie the Seventh has been revealed. There's no timetable, meaning Deion Sanders and his team will be without a live Buffalo mascot for their home opener against Georgia Tech. Colorado has had a live Buffalo mascot since the debut of Ralphie 1 in 1967. Along with a group of handlers, the Buffalo mascot would run on the field before games. Ralphie the Sixth was the shortest stint of any of the Buffaloes and had been criticized online for her slow, leisurely pace running out onto the field. So, nevertheless, I don't know if there's a live mascot that's cooler than Colorado's. Let's see here. I'd have to really start to think, but let's look. So you've got Bevo, right? UT Austin. That's pretty iconic. I think Buff Ralphie is probably a little bit more iconic. Mike the Tiger down in LSU. That is an iconic, absolutely iconic situation as far as a live mascot there for LSU. And I can even remember way back in the day when I was just a wee lad and Oregon State played at LSU. I want to say that was, let's take a look. It was either 2004 or 2003 where Oregon State went down to Baton Rouge. 2004 went down to Baton Rouge and played the national championship reigning LSU Tigers on opening weekend back in 2004. Oregon State famously lost that game 22-21 in overtime, and again, it was one of the more infamous games in Oregon State history because they missed a handful of extra points in that game. The opportunity to knock off Nick Saban and the LSU Tigers was 100% there. But one of the only reason I bring it up is I remember hearing as a kid that, it wasn't hyperbole that, when the Beavers were being ushered to the stadium back then, they took the way they were ushered. It took them on a route past Mike the Tiger. And it was like, hey, we're about ready to, go to the stadium. You guys just hang right here near, Mike the Tiger, which, I'm sure that has to play an intimidating aspect of anything. So, it's kind of interesting to see that. You've also got War Eagle for Auburn, I think, which is pretty iconic as well. You've got Uga for Jens or Uga for Georgia, excuse me, as well. So there are some options, but to be honest, nowadays there aren't quite as many live mascots as there necessarily used to be. So I like to see that Colorado's continuing the tradition. It's one of the coolest in college football to see, the handlers run out on the field with the buffalo. I mean, running with a buffalo, man, like I couldn't do it. I think I'd be worried that buffalo was going to crush me, or I couldn't even keep up with that buffalo, man. Usually, buffaloes get moving pretty darn fast. So, very curious to see when ultimately Colorado gets their buffalo back, but they will be without Ralphie, or a Ralphie, I should say, for their home opener coming up this weekend. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be taking a deep dive. Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift. What's good, Rip City? Brennan Slaughter here. It's cut day in the NFL as teams across the league had to trim their rosters down to 53 ahead of the start of the season. Here in 20 minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about that and more with Dan Pizzuta. Elsewhere, Mariners catcher Cal Raleigh, maybe the hottest player in baseball, hits his 50th homer, joins Mickey Mantle in the record books as the only switch hitters with 50 homers in a season, and he became the 8th player in Major League history to reach the half-century mark in August. Here's how number 50 sounded last night.
The 3-2 on the way to Cal. Swinging a well-hit ball deep to left field. Head into the upper deck. Stay fair. Upper deck. Goodbye baseball. Number 50 for Cal Raleigh.
Number 50 for Cal Raleigh. And elsewhere, Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift have announced their engagement after a multi-year relationship. Swifties everywhere rejoice. Coming up on the big show, we're going to catch up with NFL writer Dan Pizzuta, and then in the 5 o'clock hour, Rip City Radio Rose Garden Report correspondent Sean Hyken in studio. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter here on hand with you. Hope everyone's having a great Tuesday so far. If you're on your way home, congratulations. If you're on your way to work, we're in this together as we get you ready for your evening shift. But thanks for everyone for tuning in. Also, big shout out to Rip City Radio YouTube for everyone commenting there. And also, if you want to give us a call, 503-248-0620. Again, our phone number, 503-248-0620. If you want to jump on, ask me some questions, join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. As promised, folks, we had a winner the first hour for the first 4-pack of tickets. But as promised, that's my little drum roll here. We've got another 4-pack of Hops tickets up for grabs. So again, call now, 503-248-0620. You can literally be one of the last people to ever be able to be in the old Hillsborough ballpark. This is a 4-pack of tickets for August 31st, which is Sunday's game out at Hillsborough Ballpark. You'll be able to go out there, enjoy a nice day at the ballpark. I would assume the weather's still going to be nice. It's going to be nice on Saturday. And then, enjoy a nice day at the ballpark. Maybe check out the new Hops digs, which are looking quite nice as well. So, again, 4-pack of tickets to the Hops for Sunday, August 31st against the Vancouver Canadians. Just give us a call, 503-248-0620. We want to send you to a Hillsborough Hops game, and you can be one of the few thousand last people in the last regular season home game for the Hillsborough Hops in their current stadium. So, again, join some history. I know you want to be out there saying, hey, the last game at that old ballpark, I was there. I mean, I couldn't even imagine right now, like the bragging rights from, some older Blazer fans who can remember, the last game at the Coliseum. Your boy was a little too young to experience that, but I'm sure that was, an event in itself considering the history that was there. And obviously Hillsborough been playing baseball there for over a decade now. So very curious to see how they obviously play out next year. And that new stadium, like I said, I drove by it not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before when I was headed out to Topgolf, which is right out there in that area, and it looks really, really nice. So once again, appreciate everyone tuning in and taking advantage of our Hops ticket giveaway. Let's go ahead and switch gears, and also, as promised, I felt like we had to dive into this, and this is the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce announcement. First of all, how about them kids, man? I give them an attaboy because, it was one of those things that, I'll be honest, when it first started, I was kind of like, okay, it's a little extra. Like, I thought maybe it was a little bit superficial, maybe for the, the entertainment. I think the NFL probably really loved having Taylor Swift, at their games. And I think it turned out to be something that was mutually, beneficial. But then as I started to learn more about it, it was that, Taylor and Travis actually had genuinely a lot in common. They had, some relatable parts of their life, considering that they're both stars in their own right. And it's kind of been one of those things that's been fun the last couple of years, for me at least, to kind of watch those Kansas City games and be like, all right, what's the over-under on how many times they're going to pan up and show Travis Kelce up there, or excuse me, show Taylor Swift up there with, Mama Kelce and kind of all those things that we saw throughout. But again, I also didn't necessarily ever think that they would tie the knot, which, again, congratulations, man, because that's awesome. Like, that's so cool. And it's one of those things in life that you definitely love to see and root for. But just from what I knew, like growing up and obviously being, a teenager and then obviously into a young adult when Taylor Swift was becoming really popular, there was that theme that was out there. And it was like, I always liked Travis Kelce, but the thing was, right or not, Taylor Swift has kind of burned through a lot of different relationships in time and had a lot of different men that maybe didn't necessarily, seem to fit, right? So I was telling my brother this morning, and I'm like, oh, did you see Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce? And he's like, oh, not too surprising. And I'm like, really? Like, considering Taylor's track record, like I am. I'm like, it's awesome for them because, again, I had to look it up to make sure. So again, going all the way back to 2008. So this is a long time ago. She's been with Joe Jonas, Lucas Till, Taylor Lautner, John Mayer, shout out John Mayer, Jake Gyllenhaal, shout out Jake Gyllenhaal, Connor Kennedy, Harry Styles, shout out Harry, Calvin Harris, shout out Calvin, Tom Hiddleston, shout out Loki, man. I mean, seriously. Then Joe Allen, Maddie Healy, and then Travis Kelce. So it's one of those things where I almost wonder if, like, knowing that they're together now, like, it couldn't have been like one of those, like, everybody knew it was going to be perfect at first, but I think it's one of those things that just kind of organically grew into something that was, that now is definitely out there. And it's so interesting that it all started when Travis put on, put on blast on his podcast. Like, it was interesting just kind of how Travis Kelce kind of put this into existence and spoke this into existence. And, dare I say to all the guys out there, shoot your shot, right? I mean, not everybody can be a Super Bowl winning tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm sure when you're talking about Taylor Swift, and the reason you often see celebrities date celebrities and marry celebrities and so on, as opposed to, a celebrity marrying, dare I say, an average person as far as lifestyle, it's that's why you see the celebrities get together, is because only celebrities kind of know the challenges that, and I say challenges with, the fame, the popularity, the not being able to go into a store, and all those little things that we all take for granted, but you can't do if you're like, a big time star. And I think back to last time I was hosting when we were talking about Scotty Scheffler with PJ Dave Coleman, and we were just kind of talking about how, like, Scotty Scheffler can't go into, like, what was his go-to Chipotle because everybody recognizes him. And it's like, when you get to a certain level of fame, and I would even argue that Travis Kelce is still pretty, up there, but, like, I guess there's a chance he could go somewhere and someone maybe wouldn't recognize him. Although I got to say, after Happy Gilmore 2, I mean, Travis Kelce and those acting chops too, because his appearances in Happy Gilmore 2 were absolutely hilarious. But Taylor Swift, we know she is a global icon. There's no question Taylor Swift's star is absolutely bigger than Travis Kelce's, but because they both kind of know that life of being a superstar, I think ultimately they were able to find some things that they could relate to. And it's definitely one of those things that, like, I'm sure that, like, behind the scenes, Roger Goodell and, like, the NFL are like, we were rooting, we're not rooting either way, but we're like, hey, we ain't going to be disappointed if you guys continue on with this, because you think about how many potential, like, Swifties have gotten into football as a result, and you've seen those kind of things as well. So I'm definitely very curious to ultimately kind of see what happens between this. And, it's one of those stories that you definitely, when it first came out, like, I can remember talking about it on Rip City Mornings, like, years ago. And it was one of those things where at the time I'm like, this is publicity. This is, just doing stuff for the media, and then we've kind of seen behind the scenes they have slowly but surely built a genuine, lasting relationship, and I think that's definitely worthwhile. So all that to say, congrats to Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, and they are now engaged to be married, and we'll obviously see. I'm curious when the quote unquote wedding is going to be. Probably after the season, I would have to guess. But talk about a celebrity wedding that is going talk about a who's who of invites, man. I want to talk about a wedding, man, and it's crazy to hear some of these weddings sometimes that celebrities throw from time to time, and just thinking in my head, celebrities are probably, up of the people up there. Like, I have a feeling Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift are probably, it's one of two ways. It's either going to be an enormous wedding or one where it's just like her parents and his parents kind of a thing. I don't see anything in between where it's either like all lavish, all everything, or, maybe nothing in between. So genuinely, I'm going to be curious to see. And then you look at Travis Kelce, who obviously is most likely, all the hints are saying, is entering his final season of play with the Kansas City Chiefs. He obviously had a bit of a slower year this last year, but kind of from what I've read is kind of really worked on his body this offseason, really trying to get back to that dominant force that he was. And, you can only do so much when Father Time is kind of going against you, and you've got a lot of miles on the legs, so to speak, and on the knees. But again, I wouldn't consider myself a Chiefs fan by any means. I think I've made this clear in the past. I'm as a result of the fantasy era, folks. Brendan is a players fan in the NFL. So straight up, every year, I don't really have an NFL team. I have a couple teams that I'd like to see win, but nobody that I'm like a diehard fan of. It's Brendan's fantasy team. So if that's quarterback Lamar Jackson, man, Brendan's going to be a big-time Ravens fan this year. If that's, running back Christian McCaffrey, Brendan's going to pull for the 49ers. If that's, Jackson Smith and Jigba, wide receiver, heck, I'm going to be pulling for the Seahawks an awful lot this year. So for me, and I think it really is kind of maybe this, I call it the fantasy generation, but if you don't grow up with an NFL team, it's one of those things where I think it allows you to kind of really enjoy the entireness of the NFL and be able to kind of take in multiple, teams and be rooting for multiple things. And, even still, I still have teams that I just like to pull for. And, the last couple of years, despite them being winners, and I get that, bandwagon, all that, I really like Patrick Mahomes. I really like Andy Reid. I really like what they've built there. And it's, I grew up a big-time Tom Brady fan. Tom Brady was my guy. I know Brendan went for the biggest winner quarterback out there. But I love Tom Brady. Love Tom Brady as a Patriot. Love Tom Brady as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. The closest guy to Tom Brady is one Patrick Mahomes. And I'm, very excited to see where he can go with his career too. So, again, congratulations to Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. That's going to be a engagement we hear about for a long time. So cool for them kids. And we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Dan Pizzuta, longtime NFL writer, get his thoughts on a bunch of different topics as we get close to the NFL season. And today was cut day. You've got the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter here. I'm pleased to welcome back to the program NFL writer Dan Pizzuta. Dan, long time no talk, my friend. How are things as we get ready for the start of the NFL season?
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, doing well. Obviously, it's we're getting through. It's like my best and least favorite time of the year, Dan, because on one hand, summer's almost over, and I'm a big summer guy, especially out here in the Pacific Northwest. You really have to maximize your summer out here in Portland when you get the nice hot weather. But at the same token, it means football season's here, and it's my favorite time of the year. So you kind of get my pull from both sides.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. It's the same here too, where we're starting to get a little cooler weather here. It's a weird week where there's not the 1 week where football just kind of stops.
Yep.
But there's still a lot going on, and yeah, we're about to go full throttle here really soon.
Absolutely. And again, lots of things we want to get into with Dan. And again, appreciate your time, Dan. Let's go ahead and start with kind of the big news before we get into the cuts today. But obviously, yesterday, Terry McLaurin ended his hold-in. Trey Hendrickson, I couldn't remember if that was a hold-in or hold-out, but that ended as well. Both those guys got paid respectively. McLaurin, a much longer deal, and Hendrickson, again, helps them tie up their a key piece for this next year. What was your reaction to both those? And do you think it was kind of one of those things where it was inevitable for it to happen?
Yeah, I think both of them were fairly inevitable, and I think we've kind of seen from the details that came out from the deals, it's kind of where we, somewhat expected both of those deals to come in, and we just kind of see how little leverage the players actually have in these kind of situations where they still have, a year remaining on the deals. The Terry McLaurin deal came in, and the way it came in was, around $92 million, which is, around the DK Metcalf number. I think it's high as AJ Brown if it hits that number. But I think it was since the year, we still haven't really gotten the full guarantees in there. So it seems like McLaurin didn't quite get exactly what he was looking for, but they got the big number that makes it look better than it was. And I think kind of the same thing with Trey Hendrickson, where he didn't really get that extra year, just a bump up in salary this year. So we might be doing the same thing again with Hendrickson as we come into next offseason because he didn't add any years here.
We'll follow up on McLaurin in just a minute, but just like from my perspective, obviously not super tied in with the Cincinnati Bengals, Dan, but when just looking at like Trey Hendrickson's production and not to mention his I'd say limited years in the league, is it just the fact that he's hitting that 30 age range and you don't know how he's going to necessarily be in a couple years and the hesitation to guarantee him long-term money because he's been productive?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think how the Bengals do business hurts themselves here, where they don't, I think outside of Joe Burrow, who was, the massive exception, they do not really guarantee any money after a first year of an extension. So I think we see if, Hendrickson got a little more guaranteed this year, if he was looking for an extension, he would have wanted some guarantees into year two. He wasn't able to get that. So I think that was kind of the sticking point there rather than how much money he was actually getting. So I think just kind of, it's one of those things with how the Bengals do business, just kind of hurt themselves in a negotiation process. And that's kind of where the sticking point was.
Interesting. And then following up on McLaurin, I mean, you look at honestly, Dan, the Commanders as their run last year, they were one of my favorite teams to kind of pull for, Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels and kind of that team. They were fun to root for. And then obviously you see that, there was a situation with Brian Robinson. They're like, okay, no, we're just going to trade that contract issue away. And, there was obviously some thought that maybe McLaurin would be going elsewhere. How big is it for Jaden Daniels to, obviously he's got sky-high expectations, but how big is it for him to have Terry McLaurin back to throw to?
I mean, it's huge. I think when you kind of just look at the production that he had, I mean, you look at the production McLaurin has had throughout his career with bad quarterbacks, so many bad quarterbacks. So it's big for McLaurin, it's big for Jaden Daniels, and I think you look at kind of what that the receiver room looks like without McLaurin in there. And I don't think there was really any possibility that he was going anywhere. But I think you look at what that potentially could have been without him. That's a very different receiving room, even with Deebo Samuel in there now. So having McLaurin there on the outside is going to be a big boon for what Washington can potentially do in year two of a Jaden Daniels offense.
Catching up with Dan Pizzuta here on the Rip City Drive. Dan, appreciate your time. Got to ask about the next one, too, and that's, again, are we ever going to hear anything on Micah Parsons in that situation?
Yeah, and if we do, it's going to be about 5 minutes before kickoff on Thursday night, where Dallas comes in and they signed him to a massive extension. And that's what the national broadcasting will be talking about instead of the Eagles, who are going to be defending Super Bowl champions opening the season. We'll be talking about how Micah Parsons has the biggest defensive extension in NFL history, and that I think that's just kind of how it's going.
What's your take, Dan, on the what's your take just on the dare I say, like, he said, she said kind of a situation where, like I saw, I've been trying to keep up on the situation, but I saw recently like Jerry Jones and Michael Irvin were on a podcast together, and it was, Jerry's like, oh, I made him the biggest, non-quarterback deal in the NFL. And it's like, how much do you think is actually like, being put out there that's true, and how much is kind of just angling between Jerry Jones, Micah Parsons' agent, and Micah Parsons ultimately?
Yeah, so it's a weird one because it does seem like, I'm not sure how far off they really are in the money, but it does just seem like the principle of the negotiation is really what has been, the sticking point here, where Jerry Jones was trying to talk with Parsons directly and thought they had a deal in place. And Parsons, rightfully said, talk to my agent who is paid to legally, put together these contracts. And I do believe like that's where the communication kind of fell off and wasn't really going. So I think that's really why we're in that standoff there. And I think the kind of stubbornness of Jerry Jones kind of wanting to do the deal the way he wanted to do it is kind of what has made this last so long.
Yeah, and just going along with that, Dan, I don't know if you've got a chance to catch it, but I shamelessly did watch the Dallas Cowboys Netflix doc that just came out, all 8 episodes of it, and I think one of the more standout things is you could hear Jerry and Steven at the time, Jones, say, oh, by far, Emmitt Smith was our most, toughest negotiation. He obviously held out a little before my time, obviously, but just going back in the time machine. And ultimately, that ended up favoring Emmitt Smith because the Cowboys started 0-2 and they lost some leverage. Is it safe to say that now Micah Parsons is probably the toughest negotiation the Jones family's had to have in Dallas?
Yeah, it also just kind of depends because, like I said, this could easily be over by the time, kickoff on Thursday. But really what Dallas continues to do is just kind of put themselves at a disadvantage with all of these negotiations. I think you look at what happened with Dak Prescott. Obviously, the deal got done, but at a $5 million average per year, more than any other quarterback. Very similar with CeeDee Lamb. If these had just gone, a year earlier, when, smarter teams like the Eagles are starting to look at the extensions when these guys are first extension eligible, it would have, saved them a lot of money that they could be using to add some more players. But just kind of the way Dallas does this to themselves because of how they handle their contracts, waiting until the last minute every time. They put themselves in this situation and they make the negotiations harder on themselves. I'm sure Parsons would have been happy to have come to an agreement as early as last season if that was something Dallas was willing to do, and I just don't think they were.
Catching up with Dan Pizzuta here on the Rip City Drive. Fascinating stuff, Dan, because I'm very curious to see how this works. And ultimately, like you said, if it's, Thursday night and knowing what I know after watching this, it would be a very Jerry Jones thing to be like, hey, we know it's going to be the Eagles, night. Actually, we're going to dominate that press headlines. So be curious to see how that ultimately shakes out. But The big news from today, Dan, it was obviously cut day. I'm curious, anybody who just caught your eye as being a surprise cut or a surprise make the roster across the league, or pretty standard stuff for the most part?
Yeah, I think it was, fairly unsurprising. I think, some of the injuries might have been, the bigger. Obviously, there's some names that might have, gone Cole Strange from the Patriots, a former, first round pick of only a couple years ago. Him not making the roster. I think that's something where, former first round pick, but I think if you were kind of following along with what the Patriots had been doing along the offensive line throughout the offseason and training camp, that's not much of a surprise. It's kind of names like that. You got guys who, making the roster in New England, like a Kyle Duggar, who kind of been playing with the scout team and into the fourth quarter of preseason games. It looks like he might have been on the move, but he is, currently on the roster. So it's like kind of fringe guys like that. I don't think there were any, massive things that we saw that were, super surprising.
Yeah, it's always one of those fascinating days where it's like, the NFL 53 is not a lot of people, Dan. And it's like when you have to trim it down, it's really, sometimes, it's a tough day for a lot of people or a lot of players trying to make football teams,
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the way that it's set up now where, cut day is just one day.
Yeah.
It doesn't trickle out over weeks like it used to in previous years. But, practice squads are a lot bigger now. And
Right.
I think we do see a lot of these guys are able to catch on at least there. So it's not as big of a deal. It does seem like a lot just because everybody's getting cut on the same day. But I do see that we have seen some pathways for guys who were getting cut today to still, be able to, make a team, be on a roster in some way and have an impact during the season.
Catching up with Dan Pizzuta here on the Rip City Drive. Dan, appreciate your time. A couple more questions for you. We'll take a little sidetrack here and have a bit of a fun one. Curious what your reaction was to the Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift news this morning.
Yeah, it's great. Good for them. I think you can kind of see, if you, watch or listen to the podcast they did together, it seems like they're, very happy. Obviously, you're just kind of seeing what they're showing.
Sure.
But, good for them. It seems like they're in a good place. They both seem happy, so I don't know, what could be wrong with that.
No, totally. I thought the same thing, and I thought, it's not like they were probably rooting one way or the other, Dan, but I bet the internal numbers people at the NFL are probably like, we don't mind if this popularity keeps going. I'm sure it's beneficial to the NFL in some respect.
Right. At the same time, there's probably the media companies that wish this had, dragged out. If the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl
Sure.
again, we could have gotten, do they propose at the Super Bowl?
Right.
Or whatever. So I'm a little happy that maybe, we don't have to spend some time talking about that. They're engaged. We can just kind of leave it there. Because I think, on both sides, we do go a little overboard there. But yeah. Good for them. Was happy to see it.
No, absolutely, for sure. And back to football itself, Dan. As far as the favorites this year, give me kind of your favorites in the NFC and AFC as we kind of just approach. Maybe just 2 or 3 teams in each conference that you think really have a shot at making a Super Bowl run this year.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with Baltimore, who I think is really the best team in the league for pretty much all of last season. And I wrote the Ravens chapter in the FTN Football Almanac this year, and just kind of basically going into all the weird ways that the Ravens have lost playoff games over the past couple years. And, you try to look at a trend, and it's just there is no trend. It's just they have the dumbest play at the worst time, just some fumbles or some drops and things. And this is a team that has been, first in DVOA 3 times over the past 5 years. There's no other team that's been first even twice in that span. So this is a team that is so good, so well put together that I think, they're going to, again, breeze through a regular season, and then kind of what they do in the playoffs is really going to matter. But obviously, you have the Bills and the Chiefs in there, and part of that is the Ravens have the second best 5-year stretch in DVOA without reaching the Super Bowl. the team at the top is the past 5 seasons of the Buffalo Bills.
Wow.
Because both of those teams have to go through the Chiefs. So the AFC being so top heavy is so tough, and I think you're just kind of looking at the same teams up at the top in the NFC. The Eagles, obviously, I think are going to take a step back in some regards, but a step forward in some. So I think they still remain one of the best teams in the NFC. I'm not someone who expects Washington to regress all that much. I think what they can do on offense, they will continue to build there and kind of cancel out some of the regression they had. They were one of the best fourth down teams that we've really ever seen, but they were also one of the best second down teams, which is a little more stable of a statistic that not enough people are really harping on. So I do think there's a lot to like with that offense there. Any team in the NFC North, I could see also. So I think the NFC is going to be a little more wide open. And I think the AFC, we're going to see those same top 3 teams really dominate most of the season.
Interesting. No, I definitely would agree with your assessment. I think the AFC is ridiculously loaded, and it's going to be tough to come out of there. And I think Baltimore, I've seen, it's interesting because obviously Baltimore, I think, has got a really talented team. I think you're kind of zeroing in on them is fascinating to me because I think they could be one of those teams. But like you said, the Bills have been like right there. It's just been Mahomes and the Chiefs have been impossible to get over for those other teams. But on that same breath, Dan, you said not the Commanders, but give me one team you think who could be prime for a regression. Who do you think maybe is getting a little overhyped going into the year?
I'd keep an eye on the Broncos, and they seem to be a darling of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think you kind of look at Washington, people worrying about the sophomore slump of Jaden Daniels. I'd watch out for Bo Nix a little bit, who I think had a little more help schematically than a Jaden Daniels did. That defense, I think a lot of people are expecting it to be the best in the league again, but it's very hard to be the top defense in the league year after year. So even if they're a borderline top 10 defense, does the offense make up enough for that? I think some teams in the AFC West are going to get a little better. I don't think the Raiders are, going to be a team that you can just walk over. So the schedule might just get a little tougher for them. So I think Denver is a team that a lot of people have been kind of, touting as this team that could make this significant leap. And they could be as good of a team as they were last year and maybe not be as good record-wise.
Interesting. Yeah, no, as there's definitely has been a lot of hubbub, especially, Dan, us being here in Oregon, Bo Nix played right down the road. We hear a lot about Bo Nix and continuing on, and I feel like it has been a lot of Denver talk and Sean Payton, and we'll see what they can ultimately do. But along that same line, you mentioned the Raiders, and I'm fascinated to see, I don't think it's going to be like night and day, but I think Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, Ashton Genty, some pieces, Geno Smith. Like, I'm kind of intrigued to see what the Raiders can do. Am I alone there?
No, they are one of the teams I'm most interested in. It's kind of like you said, I don't know whether it's going to be immediately good. But I don't think it's going to be bad. I don't think they're going to be, this team anyone can just walk over like they might have been in previous years. I'm just kind of fascinated to see what the fully formed Chip Kelly,
right,
like 2.0, 3.0 offense is going to look like in the NFL, because I think there were just massive changes in what he did, even just from UCLA to Ohio State last year. So I'm really interested to see what that's going to come in. Having Geno Smith at quarterback, I think there's a lot of really interesting pieces. The defense does also have some interesting. So again, it's one of the teams I'm most interested in. Whether they're good or not, I'm not totally ready to commit there yet.
Continuing on with Dan Pizzuta here on the Rip City Drive. Dan, appreciate your time. Let's go ahead and stick up in this area. And I'm just curious, after, the first year Mike McDonald era up in Seattle and, some changes, obviously, as they moved off of Geno Smith and brought in Sam Darnold. And obviously Darnold pretty solid in the regular season last year, not so much, obviously, in the postseason. And then, they make a change. And I thought it was interesting that Mike McDonald moved off of Ryan Grubb after just 1 year, and obviously Grubb finds his way back to Kalen DeBoer in Alabama, so it's almost like all is right in the world there. But what are your kind of expectations with Darnold and the Seahawks this year? And do you think Seattle, with the Rams kind of being up in the air and even the Niners being up in the air, can be a factor in that division?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be tough just because of how tough that division really is. I mean, they all kind of have easy schedules outside of playing each other, but I do think these are going to be some closely bunched teams in that division. In Seattle specifically, I think the defense is going to be really good. I think you look at kind of what they were able to do with the second half of the season, especially kind of once Ernest Jones came into the fold, where you kind of have a linebacker who can do a lot of things Mike McDaniel needed a linebacker to do, and I think that kind of started to open up that defense a little bit. So I have high expectations for what the defense can be. The offense is going to be interesting because they do have this, they're going to go with the Kubiak wide zone play action scheme, which I think is certainly going to help a quarterback like Sam Darnold. You're really going to be hoping that, Cooper Kupp can still be a thing. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is, a great receiver. You're also just kind of really hoping that offensive line can hold up, because if there's one thing that is going to stop Darnold from being a productive quarterback like we saw last year in Minnesota, it's, the quick pressure and not being able to hold up in pass protection. And that's when he gets a little jittery, starts making some of those mistakes. So if they're able to either just have a really good offensive line by exceeding expectations, or be able to, just kind of schematically hide that offensive line a little bit, maybe that helps a little bit. But I would more expect them to be maybe an average offense and kind of ride this defense if they're going to be successful.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely agree. And that's, like I said, I'm, being Northwest, and it's kind of cool to see Cooper Kupp, the Yakima native, back in playing in his home state. But I kind of have a lot of the same questions that you do, because I look at Sam Darnold and I think he can be productive. But I look back last year, Dan, he was with one of the, I'd say a quarterback whisperer in Kevin O'Connell. And then I look over to Seattle and a defensive, head coach in Mike McDonald. And then obviously you mentioned the new offensive coordinator coming in. Is it possible that Darnold maybe won't have quite as much from like the coaching support side that he had in Minnesota to be so successful?
I'm not sure if there is a better situation for a quarterback than what was happening, especially last year in Minnesota, where you kind of had everybody going at full strength. So I do believe the situation is going to be worse. I don't think it'll be as bad as Geno Smith was dealing with last year, where I think there was a lot of straight dropbacks. There was no play action. There wasn't a lot of, motion to actually open up the offense. I do think that might have been one of the worst situations that a quarterback was in. So I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. But I think the variance from week to week might be a little bit, higher and lower than we've kind of seen. And I think that how they're able to manage that, how high the highs are and how low the lows are, I think are going to be what what matters, and how good this offense is going to be able to be for, the entirety of the season.
Catching up with Dan Pizzuta. Last question for you, Dan. I always like to, we've talked about the top, and I also, want to talk about the bottom too. And I think I'm curious just from your perspective. I look at what the Colts got going on with Daniel Jones, and the rest of us have kind of seen that movie before. I look at the Browns, and it's like Joe Flacco maybe can be productive at age 40, and then you got some rooks like who do you think is kind of going to be in the bottom and race for that number one pick this year?
I would say right now probably somewhere between the Browns and the Saints. I think the Saints are going to be more fun while they do it.
Sure.
But I think you just kind of look at the talent that they have right now. I think you're seeing some injuries along the offensive line. The defense this is a team that's also just getting older, while not being as good as it was, when some of these players were very good. So I think they are probably a team that's going to be picking at least in the top 5. And then I think, again, you look at Cleveland and whatever their offense has going on, it's not a lot. The offensive line isn't good. Again, you have Joe Flacco starting at quarterback.
Right.
At least to start the season. I don't think it's going to get much better than that if they move on to one of the rookies. The defense can be hit or miss. So I would expect those 2 teams would be my favorites to be the worst in the league this year.
Dan Pizzuta, longtime NFL writer. Dan, I always appreciate our conversations, man. You are as knowledgeable as anybody when it comes to breaking down the game, and I certainly look forward to when we can catch up next and preview and talk some more ball after first couple weeks. Thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Dan Pizzuta, ladies and gentlemen, you can find him on Twitter at Dan Pizzuta. Again, his analysis, top-notch. Always love the conversation with Dan. You can ask him about all 32 NFL teams, and he's going to be able to give you some awesome stuff. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll put a bow tie on hour number 2. Get you ready for hour number 3. Sean Heiken going to be live in studio. You got the Rip City Drive. Definitely need to take a moment and recognize recognize our Thank a Teacher promotion. Today's teacher of the day is John Lyon, who teaches at David Douglas Arthur Academy in Portland, and we are told he is an amazing PE teacher. The students love him. He's always finding ways to keep them happy and interested, and this school has no gym. The students and teachers are out in the weather all year during PE class. He goes out of his way all year, even when school's not in session, to help out. On his days off, he gets the garbage and recycle out for pickup. If an alarm goes off at the school during the night, he's always there to help as needed. He deserves this award. Congrats, John Lyon. You're in the running to win $5,000 for your classroom. Thank a Teacher promotion here at Rip City Radio, 620 and iHeartRadio. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Hope everyone is doing well, getting ready for the first week of college football coming up this weekend. And obviously, more than that, too. Like I said, we got college football and the NFL kicking off soon, but it won't be very long before we start talking NBA and Blazers, too. And very excited for the next hour here momentarily. We'll be joined by Sean Highkin, and we're going to get into a whole bunch of things, kind of preseason Blazers talk. I want to get his thoughts on the Blazers ownership group. Want to get his thoughts on, the team's moves this offseason, if they're fully done, a couple other things, all that's broke since I've gotten a chance to talk to Sean. So very excited for that. And obviously big shout out to Dan Pizzuta last hour. Dan, like I said, one of the more knowledgeable guys when it comes to NFL breakdowns. He can tell you a little bit of something about everybody. And, as I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm obviously a Pacific Northwester, but I don't particularly call any of the NFL teams around here, the Seahawks, the Niners, Raiders, whatever it is. They aren't, quote, my team. I don't really have a team. So objectively, kind of looking at the Seahawks, I think Dan's assessment is spot on. I think that defense could be nasty, like we've seen under, John Schneider and those real great teams the Seahawks have had. They're kind of building that way again. But I have concerns with Sam Darnold. And it's not to say that, he can't do it, but like Dan was saying, I don't know if there's a more ideal situation for a quarterback than working with Kevin O'Connell and having Justin Jefferson to throw to. I think Jackson Smith and Jigba is an awesome player with a high ceiling. I think Cooper Kupp, shout out the pride of Yakima, man. I mean, I've always liked Cooper Kupp, and but again, a lot of miles on those tires, man. Right? You're not Justin Jefferson, and the talent that they had there in Minnesota to throw the ball around, especially in Kevin O'Connell's very quarterback friendly scheme. And dare I say, you look at Darnold, kind of other than that, the sample size is not great. So that is something I'll be concerned about, but nevertheless, the Seahawks are going to have a strong running game. You still got Kenny Walker and that unit, and I'll be curious to see ultimately what happens. But I think Jackson Smith and Jigba could have a big time season. I think Cooper Kupp, if he can stay healthy, can have a big season. Few questions on the offensive line as far as we'll see how that comes to be, but I think, like I said, Kenneth Walker is definitely a guy who can get you 1,000 yards or more. And like Dan was saying, maybe it's more of a defensive-led Seahawks squad this year that maybe is not quite as good on offense, but they hang their hat on defense. Which you go back to the recipe for success for the Seahawks. That's where it's been. So we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be joined by Sean Highkin live here in studio, talking a whole bunch of things with Sean over the next hour and putting a bow tie on the last hour of the program. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter on a Tuesday. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. It's cut day in the NFL as teams across the league had to trim their rosters down to 53 ahead of the start of the season. We caught up with Dan Pizzuta, and he was telling us pretty expected moves across the NFL. Mariners catcher Cal Raleigh has hit his 50th home run. He joins Mickey Mantle in the record books as the only switch hitters with 50 homers in a season, and he became the 8th player in Major League history to hit the half-century mark in August. Here's how it sounded last night.
The 3-2 on the way to Cal. Swinging a well-hit ball. Deep to left field. Head into the upper deck. Stay fair. Upper deck. Goodbye baseball. Number 50 for Cal Raleigh.
That's how it sounded last night as Cal Raleigh, they take down the Padres last night. Again, the Mariners trying to fight for a playoff spot. And last but not least, we've talked about it a little bit. Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift have announced their engagement after a multi-year relationship. Swifties everywhere rejoice. Coming up on the big show, we got Sean Highkin live in studio for the 5 o'clock hour. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter here with you. Final hour of damage to do here on the program, and pleased to have back in the studio my good coworker and Rose Garden Report Rip City radio correspondent, Sean Highkin, back here in studio. Sean, I feel like it's been a minute since you and I have caught up. How are things, my friend?
Things are good. Have we talked since the sale?
No.
I don't think we have.
So that's for sure. I think last time we talked was when I hosted in July, like shortly after you got back from Summer
League. Yeah, so it was like Young Hansen Mania was still fresh, but had the Dame thing happened yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Damon happened. It was young Hansen Mania, and I mean, you're obviously the person to ask, Sean. I mean, it's maybe died down a little bit, but what have you seen at the Rose Garden Report? Is it still like Young Hansen Mania going into the season?
Things have kind of calmed down a little bit on that front, just because there hasn't really been any news on that.
Right.
As far as his, he's kind of been laying low this summer. There hasn't really just been a lot of stuff going on, and I actually think that's kind of an interesting thing to dive into, is just the fact that they just had, I think it's still going on, but the FIBA Asia Cup, he did not play for China.
Interesting.
And that was a kind of an evolution from what I understand of the Chinese Basketball Federation's feelings about it, because for the longest time their whole position has been like it's your duty to play for your country,
Sure.
and it's like a betrayal if you're not playing for your country. And I mean, if you remember Yao Ming's career, he basically was only healthy for 7 years because he had to play for the national. He literally did not have a single summer in his career where he wasn't doing some sort of national team thing, playing in a tournament. And they basically, I think he probably would have broken down at some point anyway because of just his size,
huge,
and all this stuff. But they definitely ran him into the ground to a degree. And I think 20 years later, they've kind of realized that the best thing for them and for their program is for Young Hansen, who is the best prospect that they've had in a number of years, to have a long and healthy and productive NBA career. And, he can play in the Olympics for them and if they qualify, or the FIBA World Cup, but he doesn't need to be playing in every single one of these things. So the fact that he said that he wanted to, not do the tournament so that he could stay in Portland and get acclimated to America. B, they said, yeah, that sounds good. And C, from what I understand, the reaction from fans in China has been, he's making the right decision. This is good that he's not playing for the national team in this secondary tournament. So I think all of that is a change from the way anybody would have approached this stuff 20 years ago.
Oh, sure. And just obviously, there's obviously, that's interesting to me, Sean, because, even America, to an example, there sometimes there's some passion about wanting to compete for your country and all those things. But to hear that, China and then both, Young Hansen's side of things, both are like, hey, just kind of do your thing, get ready for the season. Most likely probably continuing to learn American culture and English and, all those things that take so long. But yeah, I mean, it's the thing that I think stands out the most about it, Sean, and it was just something I casually talked about with my friend when we were out on the river the other day, where he was just like, like the vibes around the Blazers
They're great.
are just so much better than where they have been. And I'm like, you're right. Like, I don't necessarily think it's fair to like say, hey, this team's going to be world beaters in the West next year.
Right.
But like, just the kind of bits of optimism it feels a lot better going into this year than it had the last couple. I'll say that.
Well, the year before, their whole offseason was just taken up by the Dame trade
Right.
requests and,
Yeah.
us having to deal with Miami fans and media on,
Yep.
online, which was not a whole lot of fun for anybody. And then the trade doesn't happen until like 2 days before training camp.
Right.
Last year was just a weird summer because, they end the season about as, badly as they've ended any
Sure.
season. They're tanking. They're,
Yep.
all their important young guys are hurt. Fans are not happy that they brought Chauncey back for another year. And then there was that weird stuff with Chauncey and Phoenix last spring
Right,
about
right, I
him
remember
maybe
that.
trying to get out because they didn't give him an extension, all that stuff. They fall back in the lottery, 3 spots. They have the 4th. They win 21 games and they get the 7th pick
Yeah,
in
that
the
was
draft.
tough.
So they fall back. They take Klingon, which, good pick, but kind of a chalky pick.
Sure.
It's not super, inspiring to people. And he looked good at Summer League, but it's not like they draft him and it's like, oh, this is our future franchise guy. And it's just, everybody kind of is going into the season just like, all right, okay, another year of, they're going to be bad. Just got to hope they get Cooper Flag. And then you got to hope that,
Right.
some of these guys are healthy. So that was where they were at a year ago.
Right.
So think about where they're at now. Now it's like they end the season, the second half of the year, they are above 500. They're, alive in the play-in push. And then they get the Joe and Chauncey get their extensions. And I think for the most part, fans are okay with it. I mean, there are going to be some people who are not ever going to be on board with Chauncey for a lot of reasons. But
Sure,
for the
sure.
most part, given the way that the season ended, people kind of understood that.
I mean, there was hope. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, again, just talking, back or jumping back, Sean. I mean, there was a period where, I think I remember, you and I talking even when we were at Moda Center. It's like where there was a time when if they could have, I'm trying to think what the game, like there was a big road trip, like they had a game against Cleveland on the road that, was winnable. And I remember being like, there was a moment where it's like, hey, if you could have knocked off a few of the top dogs,
Right.
you maybe could have pushed into that play.
They could have.
But just didn't quite, beat the Bostons,
Right.
the Clevelands, and you could tell they were still missing some things.
Right.
But a
Now-
Blazer fan could see, like, that was improvement
Yeah.
from, like, I mean, dare you say last year we saw the Hornets game, which
Yeah.
was the biggest win in franchise history. And then you like to tell me it was the same season we saw the Memphis game in the
Memphis and Utah.
Yeah, so
Which at least they didn't get blown out by 60, which they did 2 different times the year before.
Right.
And I mean, the problem with the year before also is that like Shaden Sharp only played 32 games
Right,
because he
right.
had the core injury. Scoot was hurt a lot of the year and he had kind of a bad rookie season.
Right,
and
right.
then last year, it's like the second half of the year, Scoot and Shaden both took steps. Klingon, DA gets hurt like right around the time of the All-Star break. So he doesn't play the rest of the year. Klingon starts a lot of that time,
Sure.
and he looks really good for the second half of the year. You keep seeing Denny getting better. You keep seeing Tumani getting better. Go into the offseason, they don't get lucky in the lottery, which, that's kind of, that it just is what
Yeah.
it is. But then the day after the lottery, they announced that the team is for sale, which
Yes.
a lot of fans have wanted for a long time. Ever since Paul Allen died, people have been saying, when are they going to sell the team? When are they going to sell the team?
Right.
So then they say, we're going to sell the team now. They say that. That's out there. And then they do the Anthony Simons-Drew Holiday trade, which
Right.
Simons is somebody that I think there is a large contingent of Blazer fans that they've wanted them to trade for a long time in order to really give the runway for Scoot.
Sure.
They did that. Certainly Drew is an upgrade over Simons on the defensive end, and I
Big
think
time.
he fits better next to Scoot. So that, they did that. That's something a lot of people wanted. They drafted Young Hansen, which once people got over the shock of it, like people are pretty excited about
Right.
that now after Summer League. And then, by the way, Dame's coming back.
Right.
So it's like every single thing, and especially now that we have like, now that we have a buyer,
Right.
we know who the buyer is. We know who's going to buy the team, pending the deal getting done
Process, yes.
and the board of governors approving it and all of that. Now it's like, okay, there's a little bit more clarity of of, what the direction is long term for the franchise.
Right. And there's, like, to your point, like, there's reasons to be excited. Like, I think, like towards this last year, I think a lot of Blazer fans became absolutely enamored with Denny Avdia down the stretch.
And
right?
Kamara.
And it's like, you think about like what those two guys were able to do from the wing position. And again, I know this has been said a million times, Sean, and it's kind of like the ifs, ands, or buts, but like,
yeah,
when Dame's here, he's got to be like, man, I wish I had some wings like this when I was in my prime.
Yep.
Because, my goodness, you replace, and again, solid players for what they were, but you put a Tumani Kamara and a Denny Avdia in place of an Al-Farouq Aminu and a Mo Harkless, and you never know.
Their center rotation after Nurkic had the leg injury was like Enes Kanter and like Harry Giles, Cody Zeller. They tried to so you put Donovan Clingan in that spot instead.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and Kanter, that whole postseason playing with the bad shoulder.
Yeah.
I mean, you just think like the Blazers still got to the Western Conference Finals that year. And the what ifs, man, it'll come back forever. But, along those same lines, we kind of been talking about it, but like now that we kind of are getting this close, do you think it's safe to say that the roster as is probably the roster that we're going to see at training camp? Or do you still think potentially Cronin could be listening to offers for maybe, say, a Rob Williams, a Jeremy Grant? Or do you think we're pretty locked in at this point?
I don't think they're ever not listening to offers, but I think that what the roster is right now is going to be the roster opening night. Okay,
so going along with that, I think there's some ambiguity whether or not in the guard spot. But as I kind of look, how do you not I want to put it this way. How can you put Jeremy Grant in the starting lineup? I don't think you can, with Tumani Kamara and Denny Avdia most likely locking up those forward spots.
I mean, it's not what I do. I'll just say that. I'm not predicting what anybody is or isn't going to do. I kind of learned my lesson. I got burned a few weeks ago with I said in a mailbag that I think that, they have to be, they need to consider bringing Jeremy Grant off the bench.
Right.
And
I remember that whole thing blowing up.
And then that gets with the NBA Central account gets turned into Hyken reports Jeremy Grant is going to come off. And I'm just like, no. And I had to put it. They deleted the tweet and didn't acknowledge it. Well, they deleted it, but they didn't acknowledge it or retract it or anything.
Come on,
correct it. Whatever. But I mean, whatever. That's what the accounts do. But anyway, if I had to, I'm making this very clear. This is not sourced from anybody in the organization.
Sean Hyken's opinion.
This is my opinion. This is what I would do. And this is what I think is probably the most likely thing that would happen, is that the opening night starters will be Scoot Henderson, Drew Holiday, Denny Avdia, Tumani Kamara, Donovan Clingan.
So you still think Shaedon Sharpe would come off the bench in this potential?
One of the two young guards has to. I don't think Drew is coming off the bench.
Yeah, no, I think so too. It's like it's like that to me is the fascinating question. We'll continue it on and also talk ownership. Tom Dundon coming up here in just a minute. But that's like, do you go with Shaedon? Do you go with Scoot? And potentially like there's only 5 spots, right? Like it's kind of I think a good problem for Chauncey to have within reason, but it'll definitely be something fascinating to keep an eye on. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. Continuing on with Sean Hyken, we'll talk ownership and much more here on the Rip City Drive on a Tuesday. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter with you, joined by Rip City Radio Rose Garden correspondent Sean Hyken. Sean, continuing our conversation from last segment. Obviously, we're going to get into your thoughts on Tom Dundon, the new ownership group, but I wanted to ask you about Shaden Sharp too. He was obviously and is still eligible for an extension this summer, but it seems to be more likely that I think the sides let it play out this year and maybe approach restricted free agency next year. What's kind of your take on where that situation stands?
That's how I would guess it probably goes. I mean, I also don't think these types of deals rarely ever get done in August. Like
Right.
the two times that you see these, these rookie scale extension agreements get done are the first day of free agency, which is when you see like Paolo Banchero and Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams and
Right.
like the no-brainer max guys,
Yeah.
like get that stuff done, the stuff that like everybody knew was going to be offered. The rest of them, you kind of see because you remember the guys that are kind of more in his class, in his kind of tier of guys that like people think are pretty good prospects but aren't franchise guys. The like last year in the class from last year, it was like Jalen Suggs
Sure.
and Jalen Johnson and Trey Murphy. It was like those types of guys.
Sure.
That stuff all got done in October, kind of closer to the deadline, which is the Monday of opening week.
Okay.
So if anything happens with Shaden, I think it's going to happen then and not like right now.
Right.
But if you made me guess right now, does Shaden get an extension before that October 20th deadline, or do they play it out and let him go to restricted free agency? I think that's going to probably end up being the way that it goes.
Right. I see it kind of both ways because on one hand, I feel like because he hasn't consistently proven that, star capability that we think, maybe he still has in the arsenal, so to speak, you could maybe get him for a decent rate and get him locked up for, a few years. It's an entirely different circumstance, but one of my favorite things to look back on is you look at Steph Curry's first extension,
Yeah.
right? He had some ankle injuries, and I think it was like when they were winning their titles early on, he was making like 10, 12, and you're just like, whoa, okay, so
He was still on that deal when the cap spike season happened, which is part of why they were able to sign Kevin Durant.
right. So again, I think the situation's completely different, and Shaden hasn't had like, ankle injuries and specific things like Steph did. But I think also at the same token, I could see on the other side of the coin, Sean, Shaden Sharp being like, I haven't proven what I can do for 82 games. I'm betting on myself. Like we see a lot of these kind of contract year guys go and put in a big time year. And, dare I say, I still think we're not at the ceiling. Like I think Shaden Sharp's a ridiculously athletic guy who can fill it up, but I still don't think we've seen the ceiling yet.
Yeah, but then, I mean, yes, I agree. I think he does have a level of better that he can get. But it's a gamble on him. I mean, he can bet. He can say, I'm betting on myself, but it is a gamble. I mean, you look at the restricted free agent market this summer. Like, that's
Right.
what Jonathan Kuminga did. That's what Josh Giddey did. That's what Quentin Grimes did with the Sixers. And, those guys, we're, a month out from training camp. None of those guys really have, I don't think them and their teams are even close on deals right now.
Right.
So it just depends. Like if they can find a number that makes sense for both sides, where it's not like insultingly low, but it's not so high that like if he doesn't hit his ceiling outcome, that it becomes like a problem for the Blazers to have that contract. Because the thing with this new CBA and how restrictive it is that you just cannot miss on these big contracts. Like we've been talking about Jeremy Grant and how that's, that contract is so hard to move once it's clear that he's not a part of the long-term future. You can have one of those types of contracts on the books. You can't have like more than one of those. And so, if they give Shaden Sharp like $30 million a year or something, I'm
Sure.
just throwing a number out there. And then he just kind of stays where he's at right now, which is, he can be great on some nights, but, isn't doing that consistently. Then it becomes a lot harder once they have to pay Denny Avdia and they have to pay Tumani Kamara and they have to pay Scoot and they have to pay Klingon and some of these guys that they feel a little bit more sure about. It becomes a little bit harder to keep all those guys if you have this other. So
Right.
it's gonna be really interesting. I think I just don't know if what he thinks what he's worth or his people think that he's worth, and what the Blazers would be comfortable giving him. And I don't know a number. I don't
Right.
know where those negotiations are at right now or how seriously those are going on right now. But if they can't get to a number that both sides feel okay about, then, I think probably the most likely thing that happens is that they just let it play out and then see what happens next summer.
Right. And I actually don't know the answer to this off the top of my head, but who's he repped by? Is he a Clutch client?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not in the way that, I mean, his is kind of an interesting case because there are some guys on the Blazers. There are actually a lot of guys on the Blazers that are Clutch
There
guys.
are.
Like Jeremy Grant's a Clutch guy. Jan Hansen is Clutch.
Yep.
Scoot didn't have an agent for most of his rookie season, and then he signed with Clutch last year.
I think Chauncey too.
Chauncey's a Clutch guy.
Yeah.
Their coaching agent, their coaching division is a different thing from the player division.
Sure.
But they have a lot of guys that are Clutch. The Shaden thing is interesting because Shaden is actually with this guy Mike George, whose agency is called One Legacy, and he reps like most of the Canadian guys.
Interesting.
In the NBA. He's like a Canadian agent who reps like most of the Canadian. Like he doesn't have SGA. I think SGA is with Wasserman off the top of my head, but like he's always been with one of the big agencies. But like a lot of kind of the other like I think Matherin is with them.
Sure.
And, like Dylan Brooks. Like a lot of the other Canadian guys are with them. And Clutch just bought that agency out like a year ago.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So all of those guys that like I think his agent is still Mike George, but that's all under the Clutch umbrella, which is under the UTA umbrella right now. But so technically Shaden is part of the Clutch universe, but it's not like Rich Paul is like negotiating these deals for him.
Sure. Yeah, no, I was just definitely curious because there have been, and obviously negotiations are one of those things that can be tricky at times, but kind of going back to what you said about having multiple bad contracts on your books with the CBA as we are in right now. And I don't even want to say bad, just maybe unfavorable. I don't
Jeremy Grant contract's a bad contract.
Okay.
I mean, Jeremy's not a bad like I think Jeremy is I think Jeremy had a down year last year.
Sure.
I still think Jeremy is at worst like a neutral like NBA rotation player, but that's, for where they are and for what his role is, that's a contract that you'd rather not have on your books.
Right. So I guess when you look and you say, that's not an ideal or a bad contract, because I've had other people who have been like, well, it's not just that, it's now you've got Drew Holiday making more than him, older as well. Like, I personally think the value of what Drew Holiday is going to bring intangibly, and I know that sounds really cliche, but just the leadership, teaching the young guys how to play defense is kind of valuable within a reason. But do you think those two contracts can coexist for a certain period of time?
I don't think the Drew Holiday contract is bad at all. And I mean, obviously the intangible stuff that you talked about and the leadership stuff, that's certainly a part of why they brought him in.
Sure.
But Drew Holiday is still really good.
Yeah,
he's not as good as he was 2 years ago when he got to Boston and he helped them win a championship. Sure. He had a little bit of a down year last year, but he's still a really impactful, especially as a defender. He's still like, maybe the final year of that deal is not going to be great when he's, in his late 30s and making $37 million or whatever he's making then. But the first couple years of that contract, I think, are fine.
Okay. Yeah, because, you kind of look at it and the Blazers made some moves, right? It's like you get off of DeAndre Ayton's contract, and I think, just clearing the books is obviously good. And you've got, some guys on great contracts like, you think too, like, I think this next year, Tumani Kamara is going to be making a steal of an absolute
like
rate.
$2 million, yeah.
Right. And refresh me, has he got one more after this, or is Tumani going to be talking extension sometime soon as well?
If they wanted to. So he's got 2 years left on his deal currently where he's making like $2 million.
Right, which is steal.
If they wanted to, they could basically, so after this season, which he's making $2 million this coming season. They've got a team option after that. They can either decline that option and he becomes a restricted free agent, or if they play out all 4 years, then he becomes unrestricted. So then, but if they wanted to right now, even though he's only past his second season, if they wanted to, they could preemptively decline that fourth-year option and then sign him. The max that they could sign him to right now is a 4-year, $90 million deal somewhere in there, which I think if Tumani would agree to that, I think that's absolutely a good value for him. That's a contract that they should feel great about signing him to. But then they just kind of have to decide, and he has to decide, and this is going to be kind of a negotiation. Do they want to do that sooner, or do they want to wait a year and then give him that same extension and then have that extra year where he's making the $2 million before the big money kicks in? Because then you got to start thinking about, like, that's going to be around the same time that you have to pay Scoot, and then that's going to be the big. You're going to probably have to like start paying Denny around that time,
Right.
and if Klingon keeps improving, then that you're going to have to pay Klingon. You're going to eventually have to pay all these guys.
Right. And I think to an extent, Sean, like I'll tell you one thing, there ain't going to be no sweetheart of a deal for Denny Avdia next time around. If, again, we'll see how it happens. He's got what, 3 years?
3 years left, and that deal declines. The last year of his deal, he's going to be making about $11 million,
which is slightly more than what the Blazers just gave Dame to
slightly less.
It's going to be than what the Blazers gave Dame to be essentially kind of that what we talked about, the intangible kind of figurehead.
Or as Chauncey put it, the world's best paid assistant coach. That's what Chauncey said at the press conference. That's what Dame is going to be this year because he's not going to play, and then we'll see how much he's got left once he comes back. But really, it's like the next. If you're talking about any of these contracts for these older guys, whether you consider any of them bad contracts or not, it's really the next 3 years.
Right.
Because the 3 years is how long Drew, Jeremy, and Dame are all on the books. And after that, it's like, and that's like right when they have to start thinking about, like, that's when Denny's deal is up. By then, Tumani will be on his new deal. That's, they'll still have a year left of team control on Young Hansen at that point, which, we're talking this many years out. Klingon, I think, is like, that's when Klingon, whatever extension Klingon gets, is going to kick in. That's why they got to be careful with this Shaden negotiation. Like, I think under the old CBA, if there was a young guy like that who they thought had a chance to be really good, but even if he hadn't proven it, on a consistent basis, they'd be like, all right, yeah, here's a $35 million a year contract, just betting on the upside. You can't really afford to do that now with the current rules if you're not absolutely sure that that's going to be a guy.
Right. And I think, kind of going along with that too, circling back to, like how you said, like the wanting to give somebody a contract and then have them continue to elevate, like,
right.
If let's just say you were, let's just say they were able to get Tumani for that 4 years, $90 million. How much more of an offensive threat do you think he'd have to prove this? Because we know Tumani, like defense, it's there.
Yeah.
But how much more offense do you think he'd have to provide to get himself into that range going into, a year from now or whatever?
I think that 4-year 90, I don't think that's going to get done this summer because that deal's going to be there for him next summer.
Sure.
It's just a matter of is he the type of guy? And I remember a few years ago, and this is obviously like not nearly as good of a player as Tumani Kamara, but was a first-round pick and was a guy that they thought was like a core guy at one point. But remember when Nasir Little signed that 4-year, $28 million extension?
Yes.
Which people said at the time was like a steal of a contract.
I remember that. Yep.
Which, I mean, I love Nas. Nas is one of my favorite guys, but, he's playing in Japan right now.
Yeah.
But at the time, we asked Nas about it because he got that extension done before he went to restricted free agency. And we all kind of were surprised that he signed for that little money, or what was seen at the time as that little money. And he basically said, look, I could bet on myself and try to get more money next summer, but they put $28 million guaranteed in front of me. I'm not going to just say no to that.
Right.
So some guys are wired like that. And I think I wonder if I think Tumani, from how I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years, I think Tumani might be a guy, especially being a former second-round pick and a guy that wasn't like a highly touted prospect that always knew he was going to be making a ton of money. Somebody like that might look at a $90 million offer and say, I could get 150 if I waited, but $90 million is not something I'm going to just turn down. So I could see him being willing to take it, as opposed to, there are other guys that I could say, I could see just being like, no, I want to hold out and get as much money as I possibly can. And, everybody's priorities are different. All these guys have different kind of ways that they approach this stuff.
Right. I mean, I think, Derek, I think you're spot on, Sean, because you look like a guy like Tumani Kamara. We obviously know his journey. I don't know if at like 15 years old, someone said, you're going to be a millionaire.
You're going to make $90 million. Like I think he would have signed up for that.
But on the opposite token, who's to say someone didn't tell Shaden Sharp that at 16, 17 years old?
Somebody probably did tell Shaden Sharp that at 16, 17 years old.
Exactly.
And that's why you might not see him being willing to take a deal of that size and say he could. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
And I think also it kind of goes along too. I mean, dare I say, Sean, do you think there could be, and again, we're all talking about like, in my opinion, to an extent, like monopoly money. Like, it's just at a certain point, like, For me, just the layman here, it's like I don't really understand the difference between 65 and 40, other than just beyond money that I can even comprehend, kind of a thing. But like at the same token, I just wonder like how many guys, like you said, are kind of like I can get the money in front of me, take care of my family, all these other things,
Yeah.
and kind of go along with that. But yeah, I'm sure to an extent, I always wonder, since he kind of set the standard a couple years ago, could you ever also see a guy like Jalen Brunson, who was like straight up like, yeah, I'll take 100 million, or I don't know if it's quite that much, but it's a lot of money less to continue to have a competitive team built around him in New York.
Well, does Tumani Kamara have a dad that you can put on the coaching staff
Yeah.
and probably pay some money under the table?
Well said, Sean.
I
But you
mean,
know what I mean, though,
right. I mean, it's that there was. I mean, there was obviously some
Sure.
other stuff. I mean, there's also like some, not even just this thing with his dad, but like CAA stuff.
Sure,
like Leon
sure.
Rose was his age. There was
Right.
there was some stuff happen. There was some
Sure.
interesting stuff going on there. That's not really something I think you can apply to most
No, and
situations.
I know, and truth, because I remember when it happened, and like you adding a little bit more context does, but it's like I remember when it happens, it's like, wow, in my just kind of sports opinion, I've only ever seen that a couple times. It's like all the years Tom Brady
Sure.
could have made a lot more money, but he's like, hey, let's keep a competitive team going, and obviously that worked out for Tom. But you just don't, going along that, you don't. I think when you talking money sign and everything else, some guys are motivated by money. Some guys are motivated by wanting to just prove people wrong. It's lots of different
absolutely. And I'm in the middle of reading the Tim McMahon Luca book
things. Okay,
right
yeah,
now,
yeah.
and at the beginning of that book, when they kind of talk about the end of the Dirk era, they were talking, and I remember this all obviously while it was happening, but Dirk just year after year for like the last 10 years of his career would keep just taking these discounts and taking these low, below market deals to try to help the Mavericks be able to get more talent, and then they were never able to pull up their end of it. So, it's kind of like, how much do you trust your front office? Now, if you're Jalen Brunson, you gave back that money in order to help them get, do different things. They went out, they got Karl Anthony Towns, they got Mikal Bridges.
Right.
They've held up their end of the bargain as far as,
Right.
they paid OG, they paid, all these other guys. So it's just a matter of like how, it's all a negotiation.
Right. And even still, Sean, like, and kind of going along with that, I think there were obviously reasons beyond money, but like even a part of me in my head is like, okay, let's just say, for sake of argument, Damian Lillard is 75% of the player he is when he comes back post Achilles.
Okay,
Just for
sure.
sake of argument.
Yeah.
But like, if you're telling me like 3 years ago, Sean, you're like, hey, you're gonna get Dame post Achilles. He's gonna be 75% of what he was, but still a great shooter. Can hit a high percentage, and you're getting him for what you're getting him. Like, even to an extent, like I know Dame's value got knocked down with the Achilles, but on like the brighter side of the coin, like you could see a world where even Dame's money is like a steal.
Dame gave back money in that deal too. It's not a ton of money, but
Sure.
the way that his actual salary breaks down on this new contract that he just signed, it actually goes down the second year
Oh, really?
from 14.1 to I think 13.4.
Okay.
And
yeah.
then back up to it adds up like year by year. That I think the max they could have offered him was like 2.8 million more
Okay. Yeah.
over the 3 years than he ended up signing, which isn't a ton of money. And Dame obviously doesn't need the money, but that could have been a, give us just a little bit more breathing room so we can try to take care of, Scoot and Tumani and Shaden and all these guys. That could have been why they gave him the no trade clause, was like a
Right.
trade off for that. I don't know.
No, that's fascinating too, and I'm obviously curious, and obviously all this talk, Sean, because eventually, obviously Joe Cronin, general manager, Chauncey Billups, the coach, but eventually these decisions will also be ran by new ownership.
Yeah.
Right. And Tom Dundon and his group. And we'll continue this conversation on the other side of the break and wrap up the show with Sean Hyken talking Tom Dundon. But just real quick before we go to break, Sean, early on, what are your kind of first reactions from Tom Dundon, from what you've been able to find?
First of all, that's a really good tease. That's a professional radio host right here. But
I like to hear it.
I'm still learning more about him, but I think overall, given kind of, the value of the franchise and given just kind of the types of names that you've kind of heard, like it could have been a lot worse as far as like who could have bought the team.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. And early on, like I said, I don't know much about him. He's kind of a bit of an enigma to me, but
Yeah.
and I've heard some good things about the Carolina Hurricanes, and I'm like, hey, I think a lot of Blazer fans were just ready for a change, right? So I think
Absolutely.
sometimes a change is good no matter how it looks. But again, we'll get Sean's thoughts additionally on Tom Dundon and the ownership group. Wrap up the final hour of the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Tuesday afternoon. Hope everyone has had a great Tuesday so far. Definitely big thanks to all of our guests today, Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy, NFL writer Dan Pizzuta, and obviously now still in studio with us, Rip City Radio, Rose Garden correspondent Sean Hyken with us here on the Rip City Drive. Continuing our conversation, Sean, we kind of teased it, but I mean, now that we've had some time, you and I haven't talked about it since it broke, but just overall, your impressions on Tom Dundon, and overall, like, this doesn't seem like it's going to be something that happens particularly quickly, maybe even not by the conclusion of the season. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell the timing of the Board of Governors and all those things.
Well, from what I've heard and what's been out there, they want to, I think their target is they would like to get the sale officially closed and have him officially take over by the end of March. So that would be just before the end of the season. But what it is, like the situation right now is that they have like a tentative agreement in place, and they have and they have an exclusive negotiating agreement, which means that while they have this agreement in place, the Vulcans aren't still negotiating with other buyers. Now it's like they've agreed with this guy and his group on what the price of the team is, and it's that $4.25 billion. And now over the next several months, they're gonna, his lawyers, Vulcan lawyers, the investment bankers on both sides are going to be, hammering out the actual details of the contract, which for something like this size, that's going to take several months to do. And then once they have the final actual, full, contract in place, then the NBA's Board of Governors and their finance committee has to vet all of that stuff and make sure everything is on the up and up. And then they have to vote on it, and it has to be a 3/4 majority, which means 23 out of the 30 teams have to vote yes on it. But usually, once it gets to the point that it's getting voted on by the Board of Governors, that means it's been vetted enough and that everybody knows that everything is, where it should be enough that it's going to get, like, these things rarely get voted down once it gets to a Board of Governors vote, but it's going to take them several months to even get to that point. Like, they just announced that the Celtics sale closed, like, a week ago, and they agreed to that in March, that sale. So, it's not going to, like, just because they have this agreement in place with Tom Dundon's group right now doesn't mean that at any point this season, like, certainly not by the trade deadline, I wouldn't think, or anything like that. Maybe the earliest that I could see it happening is like around All-Star. But for most of the season, I think it's going to be pretty much status quo, and this stuff is all going to get worked out with their lawyers and the bankers and stuff.
What do you make of the fact that it sounds like it's kind of a pretty good size kind of investment group with lots of different, again, I'm purely speculating on what I've been able to see, but I think I've seen like it can be up to 20 different like investors. Maybe some people with some Portland ties kind of a thing. Who knows how all that shakes out, but what do you make of like potentially having multiple kind of cooks in the kitchen, so to speak?
Well, there's not a lot of individual people that have $4.25 billion to throw around. Like, there's not a lot of Steve Ballmers out there that or Joseph,
toilets
or Joe. I mean, yeah, that's the thing. If they get to the point of ever like building a new arena or renovating Moda Center, they gotta figure out the exact number of toilet seats that Steve Ballmer has at his, because Steve, one thing about, and I have not been to the.
I still want to.
I haven't been to the Intuit Dome yet. I have not been. I'm going to go there for the All-Star game this year, but like I'm still looking forward to the first time I go there. But for the longest time leading up to when that building opened, and probably still now, Steve Ballmer will tell you how many toilet seats are in there, like how many toilets there are. Like every single interview that he gave, he would be like, we have the most toilets in the entire. Like that's. So when if these guys are ever going to like build a new arena, they need to figure out how many toilets are at the Intuit Dome and just make sure there's one more. Just one more, just so Steve Ballmer doesn't have that record anymore.
I mean, going along those lines though, Sean, I mean, I know Blazer fans have talked about, we can kind of end on this topic. How big of a priority is it, especially when you couple with what Adam Silver said, where he's like, yeah, they're probably going to need a new arena. Like when the commissioner says you're going to need a new arena, I think that raises eyebrows for everybody in the fan base. Just what are, like, I've heard everything. I've heard, everything from, hey, they could try to build something on the Moda grounds and maybe one day Moda will be turned into a parking garage, or something they could do with the Coliseum. Or I've heard Tom Dundon will go and buy up a plot of land in Hillsborough or some other suburb. Like, of all the things that are out there, like, is it kind of just like we need to see what the highest priority is? Because I do think regardless, they will need either to gut the arena and restart with what it is, or build a new one. But easier said than done when you're trying to play in it.
Well, it's going to be impossible to really project what any of this is going to be until the sale actually
Sure.
closes and the guy that is in charge is actually in charge. In my own, like, this is just my own amateur opinion. I'm not certainly far from an expert on this stuff. I don't think the Moda Center is so decrepit that they need to just completely tear it down and start over. I think if they did a real multi-year, renovation
Sure.
of it and like spread it out over multiple summers and really changed everything from the inside, I think that could end up being fine. But knowing how these sports owners think, and also, to your point, Adam Silver definitely gave it away a little bit what the league's stance is. They're going to come in and they're going to try to get a new arena somewhere. I don't know where that is or what that's going to look like. Obviously, personally, my preference would be for it to stay A, in the city, and B, at that Rose Quarter area. Maybe they find a way to get the Coliseum not classified as a historical war memorial anymore, so they can tear the Coliseum down and put something there. Maybe they do something with the parking garages. This is all
Speculatory.
It's speculative, but it's also like we don't know what any of this is going to look like until the guy actually comes in and takes over. Then, we start to hear from what he's thinking, what he thinks needs to be done, and then it's a matter of like what is the city or the state willing to pay for or help out with.
Right. I think my one request, Sean, like you said, stay in the Rose Quarter. I think, and again, just because I've had so many just times like this where I've seen it on TV, I don't know quite how, Oregon's rainy. It's cold in the off season, right? But I think where there's a will, there's a way. Wherever the new, like a new arena, rebuilt arena, whatever, I want to create a TV screen outside, like the Deer District has at Milwaukee, or like Jurassic Park has at Toronto. So you're like, hey, if you don't get a ticket, which, not everyone can always afford a ticket, you can go still be part of like the team and everything else by being where the fountains are now, but you're undercover and it's semi-heated.
I know for a fact that they want to do that. That stuff is in the 5-year lease agreement that they have with the city.
Yeah.
Which could end up being tabled if they decide to build a new arena instead. But that is, like, I know for a fact that the Blazers higher-ups on the business side have talked about doing that and want to do that.
Okay, interesting. Like I said, see, these are things that we love to know. We love to hear from Sean Highkin, and obviously had a lot of fun catching up with Sean, talking a little bit of Blazers and everything. Like always, Sean, I feel like we could talk for another hour, but the music has started. We got to wrap it up. Big shout-out to Sean Highkin, Dan Pizzuta, and Malik Murphy for joining us today. We'll be back with Rip City Drive tomorrow afternoon, 3 to 6. It's Brendan Slaughter signing off.